Douglas Holtz-Eakin served as chief economic advisor for the McCain campaign in 2008, served as a former director of the CBO and is the current president of the American Action Forum. Austan Goolsbee chaired the president's Council of Economic Advisors and is currently an economics professor at the University of Chicago. Austan, good to see you, sir.
Yeah, great to see you again.
Let me start with you. I know that the assumption is that this is a outlier, a one-off event, and we'll put this in the rearview mirror, and this first quarter will be something that we'll never have to see again, or at least for a while. But are you truly convinced this is an outlier?
I'm pretty sure it's an outlier, but boy, I mean, if we started getting negative numbers like this, that would be really, really bad. The two things to remember here are that though they don't usually have swings of this magnitude, we do see a lot of variability. So if you back up 6 months, the quarter 6 months previously was a surprisingly large number. It was like plus 4.1%. People did not really conclude, the GDP is about to be off to the races, because there were a lot of temporary things in it. And they forecast that the next quarter's event is a little larger. The second thing I would observe is this is from several months ago. This is January through March. We have gotten more data of what's the next quarter going to be like. We see the jobs numbers. They come out in more real time. We see some of the other numbers, and that looks a little stronger. I think the problem is the nagging persistence of modest growth overall, separated out from just what happens in any one.
And, you know, Doug, I've read where our economic recovery is very fragile, and this was proof. That's sort of like, while everybody believes that second quarter is going to be much better, and you look at all the different numbers, it's clear it's going to be a growth quarter. There's still a fragility to this economy.
Yeah, and I think there are two ways to think about that. Number one, we've been growing too slowly for quite some time, and as it turns out, bad things happen all the time. You have tsunamis, Fukushimas, you have bad weather. If you're growing strongly, they don't knock the economy into negative territory. This did. And so it's evidence of the fact that we really aren't doing very well. If you flip it around and look forward, after this quarter, we have to grow at 3.7% every quarter, second, third, and fourth, just to get to 2% for the year.
Right.
So we got another bad year almost baked in the cake. We haven't seen 3.7 3 straight quarters in this recovery.
You know, Austan, I've seen estimates that some people believe that somehow in 2016 we're going to see 5% growth. Would you now revise that downward?
Well, I never have thought we were. I know there are people saying that, and what they basically have in their minds is that old joke Onion headline, you know, furious nation demands new bubble to invest in to restore prosperity. I do not see that happening, that we're going to come rebounding back with that kind of strength. What I've been hoping for is that we kind of get this bubble stuff out of the way, we get the economy back on some sustainable fundamentals and grow 3.5%. That would be fantastic. But I think you've seen the Fed and others revise down a little bit of what the growth rate's going to be.
I think Austan has that right. I mean, it's really important to recognize that, you know, 5 is not in the car. It's just not.
Right.
And we aren't going to even get the 3.5 that he's looking for unless households can actually spend more money, and they're not making enough money. There isn't enough jobs and earnings and hours.
Well, and that's what I want to figure this out. Okay, so what could goose this? Is it that frankly, there really is a world contraction a little bit, and I mean, how much is that impacting it? Because it seems like the American economy is certainly better.
The American economy is certainly better than
the world economy is.
But that's not a high standard.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the worst recession in lifetime. So, but the world economy is weakening. That was part of the first quarter numbers. That trade went down a bit. That's a concern. I think what's been missing in action for 6 years now is the business community. The typical recovery has two pieces that we haven't seen. It has a housing boom, and when you build houses, you put dryers in it and all that stuff.
Kind of starting to see that. There's some
6 years in.
No, but so there's certainly more than green
cross your fingers and hope. But the other is business investment. You know, we just haven't seen that boom.
Austan, explain the healthcare spending issue in the first quarter.
Okay, so one component
Channel your
of the
inner
negative
data
nerd. One of the components of the negative here is people spent a lot less money on health care. So on one hand, that looks like a positive, because you say, hey, well, maybe health care costs went down. But for GDP, that's a negative, because they weren't consuming. I think, look, it's good news that health care costs inflation has been slow, and you saw that in the GDP data. I think more troubling is, well, why didn't they spend the money on something else, or why haven't you yet seen the rebound of investment? I think to go back to a housing boom, I think, is unrealistic. We got way overbuilt in housing.
Right.
I think what has to be is business investment and more exports. And there, you see the weakness in exports because the rest of the world's not growing. So that part is troubling, but let's hope we get the investment going.
And, you know, Doug, I feel like the thing that too many of you guys, you economists, were relying on, consumer spending to sort of get us out of this. Remember back in the day, and stimulus and all this stuff. Could it be that Americans looked at the Great Recession and said, I'm just going to be more careful? And that we're in for a long term. That's what happened after the Great Depression.
They could have, and that wouldn't be a terrible thing. Americans have not saved very much.
But it is
for a
also going to mean
time.
we're not going to have.
But it means someone else has to pick up the load, and that's the business investment piece. Because if they invest, they pay somebody and they hire workers, and even if you're saving more, if you got enough activity of that type, you can still do some spending as well, and that's just missing.
Anyway, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, Austan Goolsbee. It's good to have you guys back together again. It's fun. You guys
Get the band back together.
There you go. Trying to make you economists look at least, you know, somewhat cool.
Meet you on tour, Austin.
Right. Thank you both. Coming up, too tight.